Welcome, everyone. I'm Dick Deming. I'm medical director of the Mercy One Cancer Center. I'm also the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our weekly cancer education series. It's brought to you in part by a grant from the Iowa Oncology Society. And our guest tonight is Dr. Kamyar Enshayan. Dr. Enshayan, welcome. Dr. Enshayan is the director for the Center of Energy and Environmental Education at the University of Northern Iowa.
Great to be here with
And
you.
he braved the storms to come here to Des Moines this evening. So thank you for being here. So we're going to talk tonight about the role of the environment and in particular chemicals that are put into the environment and the incidence of cancer. But before we do that, let's just get to know you a little bit. So tell us a bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where did you grow up as a child?
Okay. Yeah, I was born in northern Iran, just very close to the southern edge of the Caspian Sea. And loved it. It's a rice growing, fruit growing part of Iran. You don't think of the rainfall is 80 inches a year.
Wow. So a lush, fertile
Yeah,
band just south of the Caspian
that's
Sea.
right. That's right.
Okay.
A major caviar exporting lake. It's the Caspian Sea is one of the largest inland lakes. So yeah, that's a beautiful part of the world.
What did your mom and dad do?
My mom was a high school teacher. She was principal of a high school and taught Persian literature. My dad was an attorney in town. Yeah.
Okay. And then with some of the distress that happened in Iran, you at what age came to the United States?
I was 19 when I was in college, but the college was every year there were like strikes and students would walk out and they would close the government would close the university. So I went to school for a year and a half, but no credits passed because they would cancel the semesters. So when I was 19, my cousin was in the US studying in North Carolina and he helped me connect. And so I applied for school and came to the US to learn English and ended up going to Ohio State University, and I've done all my schooling there.
Right. And so the Ohio State for a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD.
That's right. That's right.
So when you came to the United States, when you enrolled in Ohio State, what was your first major?
My first major was mechanical engineering.
Okay.
Yeah. So my degree is mechanical engineering.
So you actually got a bachelor's degree.
Okay. And a lot of it was focused on energy, thermodynamics, solar energy, and I ended up doing my graduate work in agricultural engineering, all focused on energy in agriculture. So that was my work. Though, yeah.
So then what was your first life experience after your PhD?
Yeah. After the PhD, I thought that I've been studying agriculture, but had never been really learned. I needed to learn farming. So I took an apprenticeship on a vegetable farm in Maine, in the state of Maine. And back then there was no internet or anything. I just wrote to a farmer and said, I want to come and work there as a farmhand.
And I have a PhD.
So we lived in the barn and we harvested asparagus and vegetables all season and delivered. So did the whole thing from planting, harvest to delivery to restaurants and everything. It totally transformed what I thought. It just helped me see what's happening. What is our food system? What do we need to do to eat more fruits and vegetables? Why was our food system the way it was? So when we came to Iowa, I started thinking, whoa, wait a minute. We live in a very agricultural state. Why is it that so little of what we eat comes from Iowa?
Yes.
And so I started kind of thinking about that. So I ended up really a lot of my work the last 30 years in Iowa has been strengthening the local food economy of our state
Mhm.
through many partners across Iowa.
So when you were in Maine,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at this point, you were obviously very smart. You had a PhD. Did you realize that American agriculture was not like where you were in Maine, or did you think that that was?
Yeah, I mean, I had gone to Ohio, like Ohio State, right before, so I
Mhm.
was familiar with Midwestern agriculture,
Mm.
and I was very much during grad school was my formative years where I was introduced to a lot of farmers who were farming, perfecting ecological practices in crop production like corn, beans, and
Okay.
other small grains.
So
So I was
you
like
saw
told
big ag.
I saw big ag, and I saw big ag in its more ecological form. So farmers who had been farming organically for decades
Mm.
back when I was in grad school. But that was actually interesting to me because we hadn't learned those in school. So here I was, an agricultural engineering graduate student at Ohio State, and one day the Soil Conservation Society of America had a field day. It was an agronomy meeting, and I just went along. And the field day was at a farm of this farm that had farmed there for 30 years, but was doing crop rotation,
Mhm.
integration of livestock and crops and everything. And they had not used any purchased synthetic fertilizer or pesticides for decades. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. So this is possible. And they say, yeah, we've been doing this for years. So it was in that, with that interest, I went to Maine to, like, I was just a possible, just an opportunity that came up, and I said, yeah, I'm going to come and learn vegetable production, and here we are.
Okay. And then when did you arrive at the University of Northern Iowa?
Okay.
And then tell us a bit about the Center for Energy and Environmental Education.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I came here in 93. I got married, my wife got a job at UNI. Actually, I just came along. I was a trailing spouse.
Okay.
And
What was her
so
position?
she is a professor of biology,
Okay.
and she's a plant scientist and the head of directs another center at UNI, which is called the Tallgrass Prairie Center, which is all about native vegetation of Iowa. And so we came here. She was teaching. I was stay at home dad for several years, but really I taught environmental studies at UNI on the side. And about 16 years ago, the position came open at the Center for Energy and Environmental Education. I applied, and I've been directing that center for the last 17 years. And we have, so the courses I've been teaching have all had to do with either energy in Iowa or food and agriculture in Iowa.
That was a question I had. Like this Center for Energy and Environmental Education could be two centers if you had more budget.
That's right.
You could have had a Center
Yeah,
for Energy and a
that's
Center for
right.
Environmental.
Yeah,
so it
that's right.
isn't the interplay of energy and environment.
I mean, it is to some extent. A lot of what our center does, we're not a research center. We are what I call an action center. We, like, let's go do it. We turn knowledge into action at the community scale. So we know we need to do energy conservation. So we do home energy assessment and weatherization for low-income households. We helped our city invest in a major solar initiative for the community, things like that.
Okay.
We helped, for example, we helped the city of Cedar Falls do a thermal flyover of the city so that we had a thermal image of all buildings in the city, and then we could see
whereas there's leakage
exactly
of energy,
which roofs needed insulation.
okay.
And then the utility company, our Cedar Falls utilities, invested in those very specific places to fix them.
Okay.
So things like that. That's so we do projects that are very action, let's go do it type of projects. And so energy is one. Food system is another. where we are helping connect farms to local buyers, like a hospital, a school, grocery store, restaurant, so that there's a market for them. Um, and our third aspect of our center is environmental health, which is what we're here to talk about. And that we're very focused on reducing children's exposure to common urban chemical hazards that are easily preventable. For example, spraying of the lawns. It's not necessary. Kids shouldn't be exposed to it. So we're working with schools and childcare center and things. We can talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we met several times, but
Yeah.
at conferences related to the environment and the high cancer incidence,
Yeah.
and in particular, an interest with this potential intersection
Mhm.
between all of the chemicals
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
modern agriculture has developed to get amazing yields on
Mhm,
corn
mhm.
and soybeans in Iowa,
Mhm.
but perhaps with an environmental cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
When did your center get interested in that particular aspect of the
Yeah.
environment?
So environment, as you know in your work, and it's common, kind of the connection with, we are part of the environment, right? It's not this distinction of us and environment is just in our heads, but we breathe. When do we call the air environment, and when it's part of us?
Mhm.
So we know it's like self-evident, right? It's self-evident that the world where we live in, we're mixed in with things of the world, right? And so it just self-evident that the health of the environment is intertwined with our health. And so it makes sense, if we have a healthy environment, it makes sense we would be healthy. And if we put in kind of pollutants in the environment, it's going to at some point reach us. And so that idea has been, something, there's so much evidence for it. We started that work, I would say maybe 2016. We began a program to raise awareness about those things that we can control. So I really like what we heard at the cancer summit recently, the modifiable cancer risk factors. Which ones can we modify and reduce our exposures to them, maybe reduce them or eliminate them if practical. So we started our environmental health program at our center, focused on urban lawn chemicals as a way of engaging people, not as an end all, right? We know, but as a way of engaging people, moms, school teachers, park directors, daycare centers. And we said, look, you don't really need to do this, and it's okay to have a diversity of plants in your lawn. They're not going to harm anything, but we have pretty strong evidence that these things harm children's development. And now there's really I would say, of all the literature on environmental health and human health, the neurodevelopment of children, the strongest evidence is there, where weed killers, insecticides that are used just in town and in schools and in places that we've come accustomed to, now there is significant evidence that they can harm children, and that it would simply be we would be it would just prudent to figure ways of staying away from those things. And the good news, and so I wanted to say that earlier, that we have learned that many of the health troubles that we think are related to environmental health, that some of them have their roots in the environment, is good news, because we can change that. You might say, okay, well, I was diagnosed with some chronic illness or cancer, and it was just something I didn't have any control over. But if we know that some risk factors could be reduced, then that's a good thing. That's a good thing because we can change that.
Then when did your center start to focus not just on the urban lawn chemicals, et cetera, but look at
bigger
big ag as it is practiced in Iowa?
So really shortly after we started, we started the urban as a way of engaging our staff. Audrey Tranlam, who is a public health professional, and she was the one who came up with this idea of engaging, thinking about broader use of agricultural chemicals in Iowa and kind of raising awareness about that. And she created a program called Farming for Public Health as a positive way of saying, okay, farmers are actually public health, have a big public health responsibility, and they're doing it,
and an effect,
exactly. And I really love that idea. And of course, farmers are, it's not like in a judging way, because they are living in a kind of a economic structure where they have to make a living, and so a lot of farm policies have kind of created a situation where we have these two crop systems that are inherently not possible without some of these chemicals. And so the way we've structured our program is to highlight farms that are showing they can be profitable, they can be productive, high yields with much diminished use of these harmful chemicals. And none of the farmers are enjoying applying it's very harmful. They're very costly.
If they could get the same yield without the expense of adding the chemicals,
exactly,
they would do it.
And so really the question is, what policies will encourage transition, right? Because we have proof of concept. We know there are farms in Iowa for decades. Again, in grad school in Ohio, 30 years before that, people have been farming profitably. It's just that in order to do crop diversification, we need other policies in place, other markets. It's complicated, but we know it's possible. So if we're willing, if we say, okay, we know these particular dependencies in our state are likely causing health problems, cancer being one of them, but really there are other health endpoints like reproductive harm, like Parkinson's. It's not just cancer, right? It's just
neurologic disorders, reproductive system, respiratory system.
Exactly. And we heard at the conference, so you're a farmer, you're exposed to diesel fume, to the dust, and then you're applying these pesticides that are affecting your endocrine system and your neurological system. So there is very compelling evidence that Parkinson's and some of these neurological disorders are related to some of these farm chemicals. And it's going to be hard. So I had mentioned to you in my note that I was diagnosed with CLL in 2008, and like all other cancer patients, what caused my cancer, right?
A type of chronic leukemia.
That's right. It's a kind of chronic leukemia. And it's well, it's probably going to be impossible to say what caused my cancer, but what we can say is that there are large volumes of harmful chemicals that are out there that will harm someone. It may not be me, right? Because we all have different immune system, everybody's different, but we know the evidence is showing that these chemicals have, we know the mechanism of their action. They actually do damage things, and so that's really the way I like to think about it, is that to be prudent, we should say, look, these things are not good. We can do better. We know other options exist. So
Kamyar, you mentioned that your center, if I understand correctly, isn't doing a lot of the basic science research. Would you say your center compiles research
Yes.
so that you have an understanding of what the impact of ag chemicals are,
yeah.
and then your center might be more involved with educating and then coming up with practical solutions for how you might mitigate?
Exactly. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So we have a website on Farming for Public Health, which highlights these farmers, these amazing farmers who have done, really, they've done the research on alternatives, right, by living it. And we also compile the evidence. So we have, if you go to our website, you'll see all these papers that, and so our staff, Audrey, she translates them into plain English for ordinary citizens. So we can say, okay, this is the impact of this paper. This paper is saying this. We also host a quarterly gathering online called Pesticides and Public Health Working Group. So basically all researchers in Iowa who are working on that, David Swartney and many others, IDALs from Iowa Department of Ag, Iowa Department of Public Health, all of them kind of come together and share, compare notes, review, kind of discuss some recent studies. We often invite researchers from around the US and actually around the world to make a presentation about their findings. So it's kind of awareness raising at multiple levels. We also,
let me ask you a question about the evidence. So you and I have been at meetings where people will be inclined to say, well, we just don't have the proof that ag chemicals cause health problems. We don't have the smoking gun. It's not like we've got the same studies that cigarettes cause lung cancer. What would you, and I didn't invite you ahead of time to bring these studies, but would you share with us what you think are some of the seminal papers that really do show the relationship between ag chemicals and illness in humans?
Okay, so a lot, it's not, it's kind of like with the smoking, it's not just like one study. There's like a lot of different studies. I can just tell you some of the recent ones that just came, just like very recent.
Because we were at a panel and you showed like 30 different papers.
Yeah, there's like connections between some of the commonly used herbicides, for example, in Iowa. One of them, atrazine. Atrazine is an endocrine disruptor, is banned in Europe for all the reasons that there's like lots of studies showing that it may be a breast cancer carcinogen. It has all kinds of properties that are not good to be using millions of pounds of it in Iowa. So just give you a few stories I read just recently. A few weeks ago, the EPA took a measure which I had never seen before to remove on an emergency basis, to remove an herbicide from the market, which is like unheard of, because usually there's a long legal process before, even though EPA has all the evidence that this is harmful, they have to, there's long, it stays on the market meanwhile. But this time, apparently, there's a emergency clause. I forgot the name of the herbicide. It was just removed, just like on an emergency basis. It had neurotoxic effects on children, and they had seen a lot of it. And apparently, it wasn't any new data. It was because it was just like 20 years ago, EPA knew, they went through every process, the manufacturers wouldn't respond. They just removed it. And so another one about it was another herbicide recently. the name escapes me, um, very definitively linked to Parkinson's disease. So these are like now. So the questions though that raises for me is um, how much of paraquat,
Okay.
and a common herbicide used all over the country. But I want to, the questions that it raises: how many pounds of paraquats are used in Iowa? In which counties?
Mm-hmm.
Right? These are really important questions
And
to
is that
answer.
is that information that is
So,
available?
so that's a great question. It has been increasingly hard to track pesticide use by county. Iowa Department of some states have a like very extensive tracking system. Other states don't. Iowa, we've tried to get that from IDAL. Sometimes they say, well, in this county, there's so few people using it, it will reveal who is using it or something. We said, well, we don't need to know who's using it. Just give us the pounds, right?
Mhm.
So that's something maybe Mary, like the cancer registry and really other public health professional researchers want to know, right? We want to know to protect Iowans, right? So, those are really important questions. How do we track? And David Swartney at Iowa, at the University of Iowa Center for Health Effects of Environmental Contaminants, he has a database from USGS that shows by county certain chemicals, but tracking of pesticides has been difficult. And but it's a very important um, statistics we got to have, data that we got to have.
So what is your center for energy and environmental education? What are you doing with the data? You obviously put it on the website, you make it available, and you engage the public in conversations about risk reduction.
That's right.
And then what are some of the solutions in terms of?
So the farming for public health part is where we are showing the solutions.
Okay.
Or addressing, I'd say, response to the situation we're in, right? So highlighting, so we host field days. We partner with Practical Farmers of Iowa and other farmers. We host field days saying, okay, come to this farm on such and such day. We'll walk around, look, listen, hear the stories of these farms that are making a living. They've established their market. How did they do it? Challenges. It's not all like easy. It's not for everybody. You got to learn. It's pretty complicated, but the honest description of what it takes. And there's many. We organize many field days every year, and we organize workshops, just public events and sessions at conferences. One of the key audiences for our talks, for our work, are actually public health professionals. Our understanding is that public health professionals don't necessarily realize that there is an alternative to the current system. That's right. Like, this is a very important piece of information, right? It's like saying, okay, smoking is bad, but we really don't know what to do, so we just keep going. But it's like, in this case, we say, okay, high use of pesticides, high use of nitrate. There is an alternative to this.
Right. Would you say that most people who don't study it think, well, obviously farmers aren't going to be buying herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers if it doesn't increase the profit that they make? It must be more expensive to do farming the other way, or say it the opposite way. The revenue that you generate per acre must go down if you don't use the chemical way of farming.
So that's where I wish we had a farmer who was practicing that to respond to that. But I can tell you what we know. What we know is that the expenses of farmers who are transitioning are different kind of expenses. They're not spending money on pesticides and fertilizer. They're spending money on labor, They're spending money on their own time because there's more management intensive. And also their costs might be in some ways higher for some things, but their revenues are also higher because they're getting premium prices for their products that have no residues.
So they're reducing the expense of the chemicals. They're adding an expense of more labor, but at the end of the day, they may get a higher price for a product that's been grown without the chemicals.
And they have exactly, and they have shown that they're making other observations about the soil, about other life forms, more birds, more insects, the beneficial insects on their farm. So there's a lot of interesting things happen because, again, we said our health and the health of the environment is the same on the farm. The soil ecology of a place that has been farming with soil health in mind is a different place, and other amazing things happen. So you will see instead, you will see a lot of management practices that require. So this is really important piece. It's unfair to just say, well, why don't farmers just switch, right? Why don't they transition? Because that transition is not easy if an infrastructure of support and education and good data is not available to you, right? Are you supposed to take all the risk? No. Well, right? How do you do this? And so it's really important. That's why we host these field days, but we need many, many more of them. We're just a small center, right? So farmers people say, well, what do they use if they don't use weed killers, right? Well, they're using cover crops, they're using crop rotations, they're using all these other very advanced practices, require a lot of timing, the right timing. It's very sophisticated. And when you talk with them, I'm just amazed what they know, how much they know about soil, about plants, about their interactions, about what's happening on their farm. So in order to make all these things happen, you need help.
And have you seen progress? Has the education that your center provided flipped acreage from, let's say, the big chemical way of production to a less environmentally harmful way of farming?
So our center is, I would say, I can't say, wow, we did this. We have data on our impact in urban pesticide use. We know all the school. We have a map of all the school districts in Iowa that no longer are spraying their schoolyard. Great. We have parks, a whole bunch of city parks that have committed all over Iowa to manage their turf without spraying, right? That's really good. For farming, we're not the leading organization in the state. That is, there are a couple of leading organizations that are mostly educational, work with farms. One is Practical Farmers of Iowa, and the other one is Iowa Organic Association. They are immensely impactful. So they would have data on how acreage of organic farms are increasing in Iowa and how the cover crops are increasing, soil health is increasing, all of those things. So absolutely. But I couldn't attribute it to what we're doing. But still, I would say all of that work is still on the margin of the immensity of the kind of the current practices. Like I said at the conference, 50 million pounds of highly hazardous chemicals are applied to Iowa every year.
So when you look at a problem like this, and then often one way of analyzing it is who is profiting from this. So, I mean, clearly the companies that are manufacturing and selling all of the chemicals probably have a big stake in continuing with the status quo. Who has a financial stake in flipping the ag to a system that has less environmental impact?
So it's a fantastic question. So I'll have to think about this, but I'll give you a few answers. Well, one is us. And I remember at the cancer summit, people asked, well, what can we do? Vote. Right. So one is us, to know that uh, us is is represented by our representatives, right?
Mhm.
Our representative at many scale, at the local government, at city hall, school boards, all the way to the state house and federal government, they will be looking after us, right? If we elect the right people. So I would say our interest to flip the situation towards public interest is kind of, it's democracy.
Yeah,
We got to take
it's
part in it.
necessary.
It's necessary. There's no way around it. And this transition, I like to think of it again as a transition. We're in a situation that is not healthy, and we have good evidence that it's not healthy, and we want to be in a healthier situation. It's not anybody's fault. We're not blaming farmers,
Mhm.
right? And think of it like with radon, but we're not blaming a homeowner who has radon and saying there's something wrong with you. We're saying let's fix this, right? So I think in agriculture, we know, I think we need to like convene a key, farming groups, and saying, look, what are five things we can do in Iowa that would move us in the right direction? What do we need? What resources do we need? What policies would help us move in that direction?
So we've talked about herbicides, pesticides, insecticides. There's this nutrient reduction act. So when you look at nitrates, and that's either applied fertilizer like anhydrous ammonia
Mhm.
or manure.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so we have a policy on nutrient reduction, trying to get fewer nitrates to get into the water and end up, in the Gulf of Mexico. But all of that is voluntary, and
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
real carrots and sticks
Yeah.
or incentives and
Yeah.
penalties. Is that something that your center has looked at as well?
Yeah, no, we're not like a policy group.
But I mean the
But in
nutrient
terms of, yeah, but
reduction and fertilizers.
yeah, not really. It's not our. That's
No.
not in our
Okay.
wheelhouse. But I have a lot to say about
Okay.
that. So not a lot, but I can just say a few things. One is that the idea of nutrient reduction, meaning a lot of extra leaking, like Iowa land is leaking fertilizer, is a narrowly conceived idea. It doesn't make sense. That we need to think of the whole thing. It's not just nutrient. So this problem is just like too much fertilizer is leaking, pesticides is leaking, there's health issues, right? Soil is compacted, lots of things. And these are properties of a simple cropping system. It's not about nutrients. It's about a cropping system that is corn and beans. The most conscientious farmer cannot make the leak not happen. It's going to leak. It's like, my wife has a great analogy saying, look, if you want shade, you plant trees. You don't plant tulip. Tulip will never give you shade. Right?
Yeah.
It never becomes shady. You want to prevent fertilizer to go down, corn is too much corn. It's just too much corn. Like, it's an inherent property of it's
plant.
not about farmers.
Mm.
It's not, it's about policies that are forcing corn and bean on Iowa. So if we had alternative policies that we had crop rotation, transition to
that
less
rewarded other
rewarded,
crops.
then we would see nutrients leak disappears, because we have data. We have
Okay.
data. If you have diverse cropping system, there is less leaking.
Do you partner with other universities that have similar centers as your center, or that actually maybe are doing some of the basic science around the environment?
In our environmental health program, we do. we work with the EPA Region 7, we work with University of Iowa, and our staff, Audrey, is really involved nationally. There's a cancer-free economy network, and she knows all the researchers that are doing this kind of prevention work. In our other work with local food, we're mostly involved in Iowa, with our colleagues in Iowa. But yeah, we invite other researchers to Iowa, and I've been thinking about that. Maybe we need to invite other physicians and others from out of state to come and tell us, give their opinion on, wow,
what's happening in
yeah,
their
maybe,
states.
yeah, maybe, yeah, in their state, and maybe they have insights into what might be happening in Iowa, as you mentioned. Yeah.
So, as you know, the Secretary of Agriculture is an Iowan.
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity to show him your center and interact with him in any meaningful ways?
I haven't had a chance. I know the previous Deputy Secretary of Ag, Angie Tagto, who was in charge of nutrition. She's from Iowa, and we work with her. But no, I haven't had a chance. But I know the Secretary of Ag has been very supportive of local food systems. So USDA really has been investing in rebuilding, strengthening our local food system in Iowa. Yeah.
Do you have new projects that your center is hoping to work on? Of course, necessary funding is always.
Yeah. Well, I really well, right now, as I mentioned, we're working on a big project in Waterloo, very specific to Waterloo, to basically resilient neighborhoods. We want to address environmental health, healthy home assessments. So we're very practical. It's not research like, okay, let's go figure out all the homes that have poor air quality or radon and other things, and actually assess, fix, and install solar, do this, do that. So like do multiple things at once in several neighborhoods in Waterloo. So we're right. That's one of our big projects on this issues that we've been talking about. I really would like us to develop to convene physicians and public health professionals to come up with a statement we can all get behind about the existing body of evidence about agricultural chemicals and alternatives to them, and kind of saying, look, we can do better. Something like that, saying we have this evidence, here's kind of the list of evidence, and we can do better.
Convene a group that looks at solutions.
Exactly. So that's one of the things I think would be wonderful. We can do, we have all the assets in Iowa. We have the public health expertise, we have farmer expertise. We need let's get busy. Let's attack this problem.
Okay. Well, let's open it up to our audience. So we've got a live studio audience, and we also have those of you that are watching us live streaming. If you have a question for Dr. Enshayan, please just put your question in the comment section, and we'll start with those here in the room. Kevin.
Yes. A couple of times in the past month, I've seen full page ads in the Des Moines Register thanking is a list of politicians and regulators thanking them for protecting American agriculture and our hardworking farmers from those who are trying to destroy the system by banning glyphosate. I mean, when people see that, is there any blowback from any other organization? Say, wait a minute, this is just, a facade.
Yeah. So, so again, we are, so the sound has been recorded. I don't need to repeat the question.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, I like to think we live in a state that has a cropping system that requires the heavy use of hazardous chemicals. Okay. So obviously move to shift things. It's not about one chemical. I know this focused on glyphosate. It's not just about that. There's lots of, it's like paraquat. It's about chlorpyrifos, which is a brain damaging insecticide, right? There are things that EPA banned, but it's still dragging on, right? So the agents of the current system are busy, they're well financed, they're loud, they keep advocating for everything is okay. But if you talk with farmers who are in that system, honest conversation, they know those chemicals are very expensive, and right now the corn prices are going down. Like, it's just like they're not. This is not it's a bigger pattern than just pesticides. There are economic rural vitality issues about these two crops. It's not healthy for our state to be dependent on just two crops, this two crop system that has so many problems. It's leaking. It's leaking nitrate. So it's more than glyphosate, right? They're just and also the kind of apologists for the current system keep bringing farmer in front. Ooh, farmer! Like, what did you say about farmers? Like, no, we're not. Like, farmers aren't making like big decisions here because they're stuck in a system that has not been helpful to them.
What Kevin's pointing to, I think, gets back to this idea of who is profiting from the fact that we have a system in place that requires heavy use of chemicals. And so obviously one group that is profiting is the people who make
it's loud,
and sell
very loud.
those. It's kind of like back in the days of when I was in high school in the 60s and 70s, we talked about the military industrial complex. That people didn't want peace because a war
that's
kept the economy going.
Exactly.
And,
well,
people could argue we've got a medical industrial complex now that kind of keeps some very expensive medical habits in place. We also have a very high profiting industrial farming.
I have a great story to tell you. I didn't know about this. I was reading and I immediately thought of Iowa. I was reading a book about lighthouses in Maine. Okay, lighthouses, right, on the shore. Well, it turns out that there was an interview with one of these lighthouse attendants, and that there was he was saying, oh, well, before this lighthouse went, there was big tension over whether we needed the lighthouse because those who kind of there was a whole shipwreck business. Like if you don't have a lighthouse, there were all these shipwrecks, and people would go and
there's a business of taking care of shipwrecks.
Just like taking all the things that fell out of these shipwrecks. Like, it was like a big business, right? You would go and just like, wow, you get like all basically stealing, right? Going, and that they thought, well, that's going to mess up the shipwreck business. Like, we don't need a lighthouse, right? It's kind of like this, like, we don't need organic farming and these other processes that are better for the land. I mean, what's going to happen to, right? So, we got, that's where we come to Iowans. I think we as Iowans need to better understand the kind of agriculture we have. And we need to take the time to learn about what's at stake. What are the options? Are there better options? Does it have to be this way?
Have another question?
Yeah. Yes. I have been to a field day, and a lot of it was so much over my head. It is very sophisticated to learn. I wonder does the government offer any kind of tax break like they do for CRP? They want you to quit farming it, and they'll pay you to plant wildflowers or whatever they want you to do to set it aside. Rejuvenates the soil and all that. So do they do anything for a person that is going to be organic to help them with the cost of it? Because it's good for our earth.
Yeah. Excellent question. And I would say USDA does have a few programs. They're not big enough. Okay, so for example, there are Practical Farmers of Iowa would be the organization who's right now helping lots of farmers to transition. There are programs that would pay for your organic certification because it costs to be certified organic. And there's a number of programs that would help farmers with some aspect of diversification, either finding markets, finding paying for cover crop seeds, and other finding new markets, all of that. So it's really, but what you're pointing to is like, that's exactly what we need, right? We need incentive, help, support system to transition, particularly for beginning farmers, so that you start out right. You just start out saying, okay, my dad never farmed. I'm just starting to farm, or I'm new. I'm not going to do exactly what previous generations did. I'm going to start new, so that you get to know, you're mentored by these very experienced farmers who have farmed with far fewer hazardous chemicals.
Right. A lot of time with farmers, they're learning from their fathers, and it's a generational thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if the universities are teaching how to be pesticide free.
So in Iowa, it's a great question. In Iowa, actually, our land grant university has a program. The Iowa State Agronomy Department and Horticulture have an organic farming program. It's very small, but it's there. And there's a conference every year held at University of Iowa, Organic Farming Conference. It's coming up actually in a few weeks. It's fantastic.
It's held at the University of Iowa or Iowa State?
No, the program is at Iowa State, but the conference is held at University of Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a great thing. It's a great thing. We need more of them. We need community colleges. A lot of community colleges have farming program, but they're not, organic farming is not emphasized. It all depends on where you are. Some states have a fantastic organic farming programs. Other states have none. We are lucky that we do have one, and we
stewards of the land. So, I think that it could go that way more with the education.
Kind of, I do want to emphasize one thing. All of this does relate to the work that Dr. Deming does, right? This whole work of cancer treatment and also prevention, right? And a system of agriculture that is not applying 50 million pounds of highly hazardous chemicals is going to be helpful to Iowa. And it's going to lead to fewer cases of cancer and other Parkinson's and other health problems. One of the topics would be amazing to have some good numbers on is reproductive harm. Whether the timing is very important. There's lots of issues there. It's not my field, but I read about it and I'm just amazed. And again, there is a lot we could talk about to help Iowans see that better patterns are possible.
Right. I think we're still second in the United States for the highest cancer. Is that right, Dr. Deming?
Yep. Second highest incidence of cancer of all the states. Yep. Is there another question?
I'm curious, as you grew up in Iran, kind of like in the breadbasket area where you had all those fruits. Did you learn anything, or was there anything within your bringing up that caused you to say, I want to learn more about what it is that to help in the production of food and et cetera? And did you see any particular use of chemicals or anything like that while there?
Great question. So I grew up in a small town, and I would say my introduction to anything with food and agriculture was it's kind of like being in Iowa surrounded by corn. I was surrounded by rice fields. And I was born in 1959. DDT was at its peak use. So I was exposed to DDT. I remember we had one tangerine tree in our yard. And I remember standing in a corner as a guy came with a hose. I mean, a hose. And just like all over the tree, all over our yard, windows, everything. Just like total volume of some insecticide. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was DDT, but DDT use globally peaked in 1959, the year I was born. And I know the agriculture around me was heavily chemically intensive then in Iran. I don't know now. I really have been away for lots of years. But my interest really in ecological agriculture grew when I was in grad school. I was exposed to farmers near me who were growing things, just like got me thinking, saying, wow, this is amazing.
Well, we're going to bring it to a close tonight. We'll have you back as a guest again. So our guest tonight has been Dr. Kamyar Enshayan. He is the director of the Energy and Environmental Education Center at the University of Northern Iowa. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
If you know someone that would benefit by watching this program, it will be available on demand beginning tomorrow at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel and the Mercy Cancer Center website. I hope you'll join us again next week. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.